I'm going to start here. I don't know how to get rid of next slide, so that's just kind of how that goes. Although I've got that in my other, interesting. Okay, so basically, my background is real estate acquisitions, real estate appraisals, and real estate review. I've been doing primarily review for the last pretty long period of time, and so that's pretty much what I do. I worked for the feds for 5 years at Western Area Power Administration, strung wires. Did stuff with a variety of folks, including Northern Water, and I've been in the International Right-of-Way Association for many years. So I know a whole bunch of the condemnation folks and a whole bunch of the conservation folks. So that's sort of where I'm at. So the first thing in appraisal review is, amazingly enough, the appraisal. So the appraiser needs all of these things. And so I call this care and feeding of appraisers. And so, you've got to be able to give them the engagement letter. They don't have to have the engagement letter in the appraisals. Now, in one of the things that happens is there's a bunch of different standards for appraisals. There's USPAP and this, that, and the other thing. And a lot of times, folks who are from the banking world throw their engagement letter in the appraisal. And I don't support that. And when I'm doing a review, basically I'll say, hey, take that out. That's extraneous. It's nobody's damn business, honestly. And so that's not a standard that needs to be met. Then you got to have the conservation easement draft if we're doing a conservation easement versus fee. And then you also have to updates along the way. Many times I'll be reviewing an appraisal and the appraisal will be of a different draft than what exists in the addenda. Well, as the reviewer, one of the standards for review, if you will, is reviewing within the four corners of the appraisal. So basically, the appraisal reviewer is not really supposed to go into a bunch of other stuff that maybe the appraiser didn't have in their quiver. So basically, if they don't have some information that the reviewer has, first of all, they should have probably had it. And we can talk about that as well later. But the reviewer is charged with looking at what's in the report and reviewing that. Now, if the reviewer has information that the appraiser should have had, then it's a reviewer's, I think it's my responsibility to let the appraiser know that, hey, you're missing some stuff here that may or may not be important. And so that's what we're really seeking to achieve, is to get the appraiser on the same page as everybody else. And I just reviewed something for one of my clients, and it had some condemnation bent to it. And so the appraisal that I reviewed was not the most current appraisal, and that was a problem. But you got to have the conservation easement draft. You got to have, in a conservation easement draft, if you're doing a treasury regulation, you've got to have family defined. And, that's for the contiguous owned parcel. And you may need a legal opinion. Melinda Beck, who's a attorney of some great standing, did something for me way back in the day in the steamboat marketplace. And this was an extended family they had LLCs, they had a divorce in the middle of all of this for one of the owners. And so it was a very complex question. And Melinda did a really good job of laying out not only what the answer was, but why that was the answer. And I threw that in the addenda because I didn't want to be the guy who was stuck with the definition of family. So that was really important. Let me see if I can. So the appraiser really ought to have the baseline. And baselines vary in quality, and depending on who the land trust or the client is, some of them are darn near fabulous, and some of them are a little lacking. But the baseline is really, really an important document for the appraiser, because the appraiser can often out of there get that it's 22% irrigated and the water rights are presumably good or whatever. So those sort of information bits are really important. And now you can also say that it's important, but you don't have that for your sales, probably. But it gives you something as a base upon which to start. And I always like to see that the baseline is there. They don't necessarily have to put the entire baseline in with the 12 pages of likely plants and animals or whatever, but give me in the report a good synopsis of what the baseline says. And that would be, land types, maybe even, how the heck you get there, and mapping. Baselines generally have got really good mapping. So there's no reason why you can't have an agreement with the baseline folks to say, hey, can I use your maps with attribution and move forward from there? Then title commitment. There is nothing more annoying to a reviewer, well, at least to this reviewer, than having an appraisal that doesn't have a title commitment that that shows what the issues are from a title standpoint. If you don't know what the estate is that you're appraising, then you shouldn't be appraising it, period. And I'm kind of a title geek, and so that's really a big deal for me. Now, if you got a survey, that's great. That tells you presumably how many acres there are, and another good map, if you will, of what the property looks like. Mineral report. Basically, the mineral report ends up being sort of baseline heavy sort of stuff, and that gives you additional information. I'm not sure that we need to know that it is the uplift of the whatchahoozits or whatever, but having somebody say that the possibility of extraction is so remote as to be negligible. That's certainly a punchline that I want to have somebody other than the appraiser make, and that's the mineral report. And then maps, get them wherever you can. When I was working for Cattleman's back in the day, they really had good maps. And when I was working there, I had Tim, who was working with me, and he cranked out fabulously good maps. We had a good mapping software, and that also allowed me to put them in my Garmin so I could find where the hell that 40 acres was in the forest, because otherwise you have this picture of sale number 4, forest looking west. Nobody can tell you, where the hell that is. It's like when I did airport appraisals, we had wheat field looking west. I mean, you can't tell what any of that is. So then next, what you need to get to the reviewer is, get the reviewer on board early. If there's a GOCO component to it, that's a GOCO standard, and you need to have the reviewer, and GOCO will hire the reviewer. But you need to make sure that the reviewer and the appraiser are talking. So if all of a sudden you say, well, gee, I don't know what that answer is, then you should have the conversation with your appraiser and with GOCO and try to get that together to make sure that's the case. And then again, as a reviewer, I certainly like the baseline and title if available. If one of the land trusts is going to send me some work, or an attorney that I'm working with, especially, I want baseline and title, especially if we're going to do some sort of negotiation or litigation. Those are documents that are super important. And then make sure the reviewer has the most recent iteration of the appraisal. Like I was referring to earlier, I reviewed an entire appraisal and sent comments to the appraiser, and they said, God, I'm not getting this on page 33, this comment that you have. And so I rolled to my iteration, page 33. Well, yeah, it's right there. It's the third paragraph down. And he goes, oh, that's an earlier iteration of the report. Well, that's fairly annoying when that happens. And you don't want to burn bridges. This picture is of the Cisco Bridge on the way to Moab. It was an old wooden bridge, suspension bridge, and it was caught on fire inadvertently and really screwed up transportation using that route for a while. Now there's a new bridge there, but that's one of my favorites. So then, first fork in the road, you got to take the right fork. Don't poke the bear and piss him off, because nobody wants a pissed off bear. First thing is, what's the objective and purpose of the review? You've got to have that in mind, not only internally, but to give to the appraiser reviewer. And is it an internal review that you want, or is it external? Is that going to go somewhere other than just to the land trust or the governmental organization or whoever? And then what's the standard? Is it Treasury regs, useful yellow book, if you will, USPAP? Everything is USPAP, okay? You've got to comply with USPAP as an appraiser and a reviewer, no matter what you're doing. So that's the base. And it's a standard which is reasonable, but it's not as high of a standard as Yellow Book, the USFLA, or Treasury regs. So you got to make sure that everybody knows what the intended use of the appraisal is and what the intended use of the review is. Then you want to make sure that you're complying with land trust alliance standards. Just from the standpoint of the land trust, you want to make sure that that's all going reasonably well. And the other thing, one other thing I want to stop here and say, if someone has a question, feel free to jump in and unmute or whatever you got to do if you're waving at me, I'm not seeing you because I have a different screen up. So,
and you're also welcome to, sorry to interrupt, Kevin. You're also welcome to put it in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and I'll let Kevin know if we get questions in there.
Okay. Yeah, I can't type nearly as well as I can talk. And everybody knows that I talk, maybe a lot. So at any rate, you may have internal review for tax credit compliance. From the land trust standpoint, that could be pretty important. And again, for the next bullet, for protection of your landowners and protection of the land trust itself. I mean, you want to make sure that works. And if you're representing someone as legal counsel, you darn sure want to make sure that that's going to work. Even though it may go through the state, and nowadays, the new game seems to be that you just go through the state and don't even worry about the federal tax credit because that's just, it's just not worth going through that extra step. But nonetheless, the state standard is still a very high standard, and you want to make sure that it gets there. One of my probably overused phrases is that I want to make sure that the appraisal gets to be as good as it can be on the friendly side of the street before it rolls over to the unfriendly side of the street. And back in the day, the unfriendly side of the street was the state. And so you want to make sure you were pretty well bulletproof before you send it in. Otherwise, all sorts of bad things would happen. So again, protection of land trust, your funders, GoCo, whatever, however else you're funding your transaction, you want to make sure that those funds are well stewarded, and protection of other organizations, whoever may be down the line. So this slide is sort of the same thing as the last one, except it's just a little bit more inclusive. So you may include several objectives or intended uses. Review for the Division of Conservation. If you get that done, then my understanding is that they may go through it fairly quickly, and that might save you some time. Now, certainly Ariel is a hell of a lot bigger expert in that particular component than I am at this point. Most of my reviews right now do not go to the Division of Conservation. Most of them are for GoCo or other governmental organizations. Occasionally I do some things for attorneys. I have done some stuff for negotiation with the Department of Revenue. So you got to decide what your objective is. It may just review to support internal decision making. Maybe you're not sure whether this is a transaction that you want to get involved in or not. Again, support for various funders, GoCo, CPW, whoever. And then if you have the internal staff review, if that's what your objective is, you have to make sure that the components of the property are understood by the appraiser. So the land trust or attorneys or governmental organizations are uniquely qualified to make sure that what the objective is of the transaction is fully reflected within the appraisal. Are the conservation easement restrictions accurate? And I go through reviews and want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Oftentimes what happens is that the baseline will say that it's 452 acres, the appraiser will say it's 438, and something else will say it's 457 or something like that. If it's just a use PAP appraisal, that may not be super critical. But if you're sending that to the Division of Conservation or to the IRS, those numbers ought to all be the same. So if you're reviewing the appraisal, where do you start? I think you got to start at the back. You got to figure out whether or not the correct iteration of the CE is in there. And then here's a question. Did you send the most recent iteration of the CE to the appraiser so that they're working off the right iteration? And I oftentimes, a whole bunch, much more than I would think, the iteration of the conservation easement that is in the addenda is not the one that the appraiser is appraising to, and it probably is more current than the one that's in the addenda, but nonetheless, all that stuff has to line up, Then I look at title work. Again, I'm a title geek. So you got to decide what the estate is that the appraiser is reviewing and appraising. So if you've got a bunch of easements that run through the middle of it, whatever it is, and the appraiser's opinion of highest and best use is for development into 40 acre subdivision, well, you got to pretty much figure out where the hell those easements are and whether or not that's an impediment to somebody digging a basement in the middle of that easement. Baseline, I always read the baseline. Again, great information. Any other supporting data, the survey, the legal opinion regarding contiguous owned, that sort of thing. Here's a good Yogi Berra. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And so he always said stuff that was really brilliant, even though he was goofy. And that really is true. I mean, you look at appraisal theory and you look at appraisal practice, and it may not be a one-to-one. And so a lot of times I'll say, I had one this week where they were doing chain calculations, where it was like you do a time adjustment. So then you get the time adjustment. Then you do location. Then you get to the location adjustment. And then from that adjustment, you do access or something like that. Most people will do time adjustments. Then there'll be a stack of other adjustments, and they'll net that stack. This one did not do that. So, and there's no absolute rule related to that. The question is, where did you get that adjustment? Is that what the sale, the old appraisal saws? Well, that's what the market says. So if that's what the market says, is you do it in a chain rather than, collectively, then that's fine. But if that's the case and you're doing it, which is a little bit different than usual practice, give me an explanation that that's really what you're doing. Use of spreadsheets. That's absolutely a fabulously great idea. The checkbox thing. It allows a systematic, is it in there methodology. I mean, you go down the review checklist, and I do this on every appraisal that I work on. And a lot of it is it's absolutely in there. But nonetheless, I'll go through and put a yes in that box. Okay. Division of Conservation has a program. That program has a spreadsheet, and that's pretty good too. I've got one, obviously, for Treasury Standard or Useful or USPAP. And then one of the things that is really a good one is what I got from one of my buddies who runs the Department of Interior appraisal arm, and he's got a Yellow Book spreadsheet that his staff developed, which is just really good. And Yellow Book, and again, a lot of appraisal discussion is, you really should do this. Is it should or must? So that particular spreadsheet is really good, that shows what is must, what you have to do for a Yellow Book compliant thing. Now, Yellow Book appraisals are much less prevalent now than they used to be. But nonetheless, if you got one of those, you probably ought to have this spreadsheet. And anybody who wants any of these spreadsheets, Division of Conservation, be more than happy to send it to you. I'd be happy to send whatever sort of spreadsheets I've got to anybody. So you just, send me an email or whatever. So now we go to the what pisses off the small cat there, which is a small wildcat of some description. Appraising the wrong property, larger parcel issues. That is a really, that's you're dead out of the water. You can't if you're appraising the wrong property, then it doesn't matter how smart you are, it ain't gonna work. Then you have small sales and large subject. You've got 5,000 acre ranch, and they're using thousands or even worse 40 acre parcels. That immediately throws up the red flag and says, this person is smoking the number. And by and large, where you smoke the number in an appraisal is in the before value. It's not really that much in the after value. It's mostly in the before value. Although now, in these days, the amount of diminution is lowering somewhat substantially. And just because there's a lot of folks who are buying encumbered property for, my opinion is, a whole bunch of money. That's because it's impolite to say shitload. So I say whole bunch, unless I say that other word. So and so, to me, one of the things there is, okay, so they're buying all these properties for a bunch of money. And so why why is that less of a diminution? And the answer is because, the property sold unencumbered or whatever before for, virtually the same number or close to the same number. My opinion is in a lot of markets, like in the steamboat market per se, if you want some really cool real estate with, a quarter mile of Yampa River or the Elk River or whatever, then many of those properties already have conservation easements on there. And somebody who has the means to run out and buy a ranch that is sort of a trophy ranch sort of thing, they're looking for the components and not necessarily for the market value. Now, that being said, that ends up sort of being defined as market value. It's sort of like back in the old days when I was doing DIA appraisals, that was in the FDIC take-back days. So there were no big sales because all of those went back to Capital Federal or whoever the S&L was. And so then you say, well, so those sales out of foreclosure, there were just so many of them, that was the entire market. So is that the market? Yeah, I think it, that sort of makes it that it is the market. So highest and best use analysis. I said so. The highest and best use is, hold for future development or division into 35-acre parcels or whatever. Well, give me some reasons. And if it's inconsistent with your area analysis or financially feasible, that ain't the answer, And so that's really a big deal. You've got to have that analysis, especially in a tax-purposed appraisal, whether it be state or federal. That has to be pretty well beat to death. And it's not overly complex to do so, but a lot of folks don't necessarily go down that road far enough, in my opinion. Then the other thing that happens a lot of times is not reporting both before and after highest and best use. Is that absolutely required? Probably in Yellow Book, yes, but in the rest of it, probably no. But is it a good standard to try to meet? Absolutely. So then taxpayer ID, that's kind of a no-brainer. You got to have that for that. And then inadequate discussion of before estate by title or deed. I did a presentation with another one of my pals at the International Right-of-Way Association, and he had a property that he did the presentation on where it had a deed restriction, and it was like 15 pages into the deed restriction, and it basically made the property so that you couldn't sell it. And so that was missed by freaking everybody except this buddy of mine. So some more common errors. Not analyzing the pending agreement for sale. That's a GOCO standard, okay? And it's a GOCO standard, but really that isn't the biggest standard. It's a Uniform Standards of Appraisal Practice standard. So pending agreement for sale, you've often got a transaction that the open space program is going to buy out, or the conservation fund, or somebody. The Land Trust Alliance is doing, funding from these people and those people and those people, and it's dependent upon the appraisal or whatever. Just saying, there's a pending agreement between, the open space program and the landowner. That's not analyzing, that's reporting. So the standard is analyzing, not reporting. So you can say it's contingent upon an appraisal that is acceptable to both parties, and that's fine. But if they say in their transactional documents that it's got to be an appraisal value of more than $750,000 or something like that in order for the transaction to go, that's an agreement for sale. So you got to report that. And whether or not it works is not the appraiser's issue, whether or not that number comes in at the correct number, although that a lot of people think it is. So there's inconsistent math a lot of times. Time adjustments are particularly problematic. You can do compound time adjustment, which is 1 month on top of 1 month on top of 1 month on top of 1 month, or just overall you know, time adjustments that aren't compound, that are regular time adjustments that say between 1968 and 1972, it went up 14%. So then one of the things that is absolutely not going to pass is errors in the transmittal, summary of salient facts, conclusion paragraphs. You can't say the answer is, you know, 1,000,005 on page 86 and 1,450 on page 2. So you've got to be able to have that, and I will even ask for spelling errors to be, or you know, give me a verb in this sentence, please, or a noun. I don't know, something. You know, I've got to have that. Inadequate certifications for a yellow book. There's a whole couple, 2 or 3 things that you got to have in there for certification. And most appraisers are there, but sometimes you just miss it because you're doing, you know, treasury regulation, then you do a yellow book appraisal and you just forget to put it in there. So that's one of the things that I send a lot of times. And then trust me, no basis for adjustments. I mean, even a USPAP appraisal, which is much less of a standard for this particular issue, needs to have something in there that says, you know, bigger than the red box, smaller than a Greyhound bus. But it's kind of like sales 2 and 3, but not like sales 4 and 5. So therefore, you know, we think 2 and 3 are better, and therefore we're making an adjustment. So then we also have contrived math, formatting, automation systems. If you've got stuff that is just you know, math based rather than appraisal logic, you got to still have the logic in there. The formatting and automation systems are fabulous, but you still got to have logic in there to explain why the thing on page 14 is the same on page 48. You got to disclose client and intended user. You got to have that in there. And then ownership not matching title work. It'll say in the summary of salient facts, ownership, Joe Smith. The title work says Joe Smith Trust or whatever. You know, that's got to be the same. Or you have to explain that the title work's old and now it's changed to Joe Smith Trust, and you know, so that's how that goes. Hypotheticals and extraordinary assumptions, misidentified or missing. Hypotheticals, real basically, are lies. It is what we know is not true, but you're using it for sake of the analysis. And that is, the classic is in a conservation easement analysis, that the hypothetical is that the property is, you know, is encumbered by the conservation or is not encumbered by the conservation easement at date of value. Extraordinaries might be, you know, we're pretty sure that the zoning can be changed. We talked to everybody. They said the zoning can be changed, but that's probably an extraordinary assumption that the zoning can be changed. Then inconsistency between sales, spreadsheets, and narrative. Those have got to match. If your sales sheet says that it's $812 an acre and your spreadsheet on page 86 says it's 872, that's a problem. The other thing that really boggles my mind as a reviewer is using insider language that only an appraiser would know. I mean, you know, the game of appraisal is a game of communication. You've got to be able to tell the story so that virtually everybody comes along for the ride and gets to the same answer that you do. It shouldn't be a mystery till page 48, you know, or page whatever the hell is last. So weak easement analysis, bad math on diminution. That's fairly common. You know, you say sale, conservation and encumbered sale 2, you know, is a diminution of 48%, and don't even tell me what the restrictions are on sale number 2. You've got to be able to tell the whole story, because that's really a big basis upon which you're making your analysis. Here's a good one: water rights or other experts taken at face value. I did a bunch of stuff in the Arkansas Valley, and in the upper Arkansas Valley, and we had a fabulous water engineer who was doing work for us and just did a wonderful job. But he went a little farther and did value. What I needed and what I had him do instead was to stack the sales. And so all of that information that he gives you is great information and it's helpful, but it may not be market information. It could be information as it sells to Aurora or whatever, and Aurora doesn't buy it very often. And if all your sales are farmer to farmer or rancher to rancher, then you can take that information from the water rights guy and say, and use it to make an adjustment. But it isn't necessarily the be all end all. Same thing with mineral rights. Gravel, big deal there. That was a big deal in other venues. So summation, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Summation is not allowed. But if you're doing an analysis in North Park and you know that sage is worth 575 and irrigated is worth 1250, and you've got a property that's half irrigated and half sage, it is totally legitimate to say that based upon my sales, that the sage component of this property is worth 575 and the irrigated is worth 1250. And so that is a legitimate thing, assuming that your sales all say that. Now, that's a land class analysis, and that's a really big deal in the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers, not so much in the Appraisal Institute. But I mean, you've got to look at it to see whether or not that's really what's happening in the marketplace. And if it is, you report it. So you say, this is why, and this is what works. That's a big deal also in water rights. Do you add the water rights at the end, or is the water rights a component of the irrigated land? Then no discussion of enhancement. I mean, even if you don't think there's an enhancement, if the appraiser doesn't think there's an enhancement, you got to say something. You can't just blow it off and just say, well, yeah, but I just didn't think there was any enhancement. Doesn't matter. Put it in the report. And then no discussion of family and enhancement. I mean, Uncle Harry, who lives across the street, that's material, so you got to have that in there as well. So that's pretty much all I've got. And I've, taken up what looks like a whole bunch of the time. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if I can't go back to where everybody else is.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Kevin. We had one question in the chat asking if you would be willing to share your slides, and also if you are comfortable just sending Bianca. If Bianca could get the slides and the checklist from you, we'd be happy to share them out to everybody who is on the call. If you're comfortable with them being shared that far and wide. If you prefer people to ask you one-on-one, we can do that too. But just to make it easier for folks, we thought we'd offer that if that was helpful.
Okay, Bianca already has my slides, so those can go out quite easily. Spreadsheets, I'd prefer to have somebody ask me the spreadsheets just because I want to sort of have a better idea as to what sort of legs they have. It's sort of like the appraisal, who's got the appraisal of whatever the hell I did last. So
that sounds good. Well, then what we'll do is Bianca will send everyone a copy of the slides. And if you're interested in getting one or more of the checklists that Kevin described, just send him an email, and his email address is in the chat. So you can get that right from there. And who else has questions? You feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask them, or you're welcome to type in the chat box, whatever you prefer. JD, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Kevin. This is a great presentation. I am the executive director of Colorado Headwaters Land Trust in Grand County. And so we do a project maybe 2 a year or so. From the professional side, from the appraiser side, do you prefer, I guess, internal baseline reports? Like if if the organization does the baseline, or do you like seeing a professional or like a company do those baseline reports, or does it not matter?
Well, here's the first thing is that the state of the land trust community at this point is that you got to be really flippin' smart to even get a job in the land trust community now. I'm not sure I could compete. I'm not sure I could compete. So to say that land trust staff isn't professional to do a baseline is probably, in my experience, incorrect. What I'm looking for is something that's complete. And from my standpoint, the complete thing would be whether or not folks have description of the various land types. Maybe percentages would be handy. Some good mapping so that again, none of this stuff should be a mystery. I mean, we're telling a story, and we're telling a story as best we can on the friendly side of the street before it goes to the unfriendly side of the street. And let me tell you, there is an unfriendly side of the street, and it could be as much as one of your donors gets pissed off because they think that you did something incorrect. If you've got the file to support it, that's a big deal. And if the state comes in or Land Trust Alliance comes in, you want to have that stuff covered. So whatever it is that is complete, I'm fine with. There are some really fabulously good baseline preparers out there who are professionals who do that only. And that probably is an advantage. But to say that the staff can't do it, I've had great baselines from cattlemen's, for instance, when I was doing a lot of stuff in the Routt County area. And so, there's good talent. You just got to decide whether or not you guys have the bandwidth in the office, and presumably that might save your landowner some money.
Okay, well, thank you for that. It's been the conversation here is if and when we grow our conservation staff, if baseline reporting is a skill that we need, and hearing this from you is helpful. So thank you.
Okay.
Who else has some questions? Anyone else? Or does anyone have a project that they're working on that they'd like to share any information about appraisal issues that they've been dealing with, or something new they've learned? We can turn this into any kind of information sharing on the appraisal topic that would be useful to folks.
And Joy, I am stunned that you don't have a question.
Did he bait you? Oh, you're muted, Joy.
Sorry, I was muted. I don't know why you're stunned. And actually, I've been listening to you for many years. Some of your stories are repeats. Some of them are not.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
When you get run over by the bus a couple of times, you tend to remember that.
Yeah. I'm glad to see that you're still doing reviews, though.
Well, it's so nice to have you here with us, Kevin. We really, really appreciate you taking your time to spend with us. And everyone has your email address, so if other questions pop up, feel free to reach out to Kevin with those. And I appreciate all of you for coming and spending your time with us this morning and learning, because this is just, it's so important that we're all paying attention to the appraisals and helping to make sure that we're keeping the standards high. So it's really all of our responsibilities. So thank you all so much. Anybody have anything before we say goodbye? Okay, everyone gets an extra 11 minutes back in their life. Enjoy.
Thanks, Kevin.
Use it wisely. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.